Hello, and welcome back to the War of Ideas podcast. I am, as always, Cody Symbol. Alright, it's been a while, at least a little more than usual between episodes, and a lot has happened, namely on the mass shootings and sexual harassment front. That is not the main topic today, but I still would like to offer a few thoughts about it. We've had sexual assault from people who are considered to be liberals and people who are considered to be Republicans, and actual liberals and Republicans that are in Congress right now. And we've had both mass shootings and terrorist attacks, where if the mass shooting is done by a white person, the people on the left on social media go nuts and use these events as reasoning to get rid of guns, and the right has to defend these mass shootings. Well, actually, they're trying to defend guns and not defend the people who committed the act. And when it's a terrorist attack done by a person of another religion or another ethnicity, the right goes nuts and uses those acts as a reasoning to ban all people from coming in from other countries, put up a wall, strengthen our vetting process, don't let any immigrants come in. And the left tries to defend immigrants and defend open borders. Yes, there is a difference between a random white guy shooting people up for no reason other than being depressed about his own life or angry at somebody else, and a random jihadist doing it for a very specific reason, to give glory to their God. They're both terrible things that should be condemned, and we need to be honest with ourselves that there are two vastly different ways to solve these problems. And they are both valid problems, and both problems may not be equally difficult to solve, and may not have the same urgency to be solved as one another. One of the things these acts do have in common, though, is that they can both be lessened with good ideas. And now sexual harassment. Won't go on for that long about this, except to say Al Franken and Roy Moore's situations are very different. What they did is very different. One has admitted to it and the other one hasn't, and that's a big difference. And Trump is using that to his advantage. Hey, he said he didn't do it, so if he didn't do it, then why not vote for him? And to me that sounds perfectly reasonable. I'd bet $1,000 that Roy Moore did do it, and he did get banned from a mall for going after teenage girls, and he did try to get a 14-year-old to sleep with him. I'd bet all the money I have. But the right thing to say, before it gets proven, if the guy is saying he didn't do it, the right thing to say is, I stand by him, if you do believe him. What Al Franken did was much less serious, but still, some things were pretty bad, and I don't really know if he should resign or not. I mean, it wouldn't be a big deal if he did. Another Democrat would just take his place. And it's not like you'd get any points from the Republicans if he resigned anyway. It'd be a win for them if he resigned. And it's a win for them if he doesn't, because they get to, as they are doing now since he hasn't resigned, they get to slam the Democrats for hypocrisy, for not asking him to step down, like they are for Roy Moore, even though what Roy Moore did is vastly different than what Franken did. as I mentioned before. And before I finish talking about this, I just want to say I feel bad for people who have had the same things happen to them, but because the person that harassed them or assaulted them is not famous, they don't get the same kind of justice because it's not as big of a deal if the person that did it isn't famous. People might be less likely to believe your story because it's not a big scoop for their newspaper. People would be less interested in your story. People would just say, why don't you just suck it up? No one really cares, and just get a new job or move out of town, but you're never going to get this guy fired, let alone thrown in jail for what he's done. And for those people, which is, what do you know, a giant majority of people, since there's not that many famous people, I wish you good luck, and I want you to know that people out there care about you too, and they care about your story. So talk to anyone who will listen. You deserve to be heard just as much as anyone else. Alright, now on to the main topic today. And I want to start by playing a short 1-minute clip of Sam Harris during a recent conversation he had with Richard Dawkins and Matt Dillahunty at the Orpheum Theatre in Vancouver. It was during a Q&A. He was not talking to Dawkins or Matt. He was answering a question from a fan.
It strikes me that the second part is resource allocation has been a challenge, and that's been one of the drivers of tribalism, is that in the quest for resources, we've not been nice to each other. Given the abundance that we are seeing that technology is creating and sort of the democratization of that abundance, will that solve some of these problems and leapfrog us ahead in evolution?
One of these moral emotions that we have, if you imagine a world of real abundance, like a world where we've built the right AI that's just pulling wealth out of the atmosphere, and no one really has to work anymore, right? Because we literally have machines that can build machines that can build machines that are all powered by sunlight, that do everything better than we can. Now, why wouldn't that be some kind of utopia? Well, it wouldn't be a utopia because we have these very weird emotions, or many of us do, that make it seem like it would be wrong to spread the wealth around. It would be right, like most people are living as though they want to live in a world where there's a few trillionaires living in compounds ringed by razor wire, and everyone else is sort of starving to death. It's like a winner-take-all scenario. And so we have to find a new ethic whereby people are no longer, their purchase on existence is no longer justified by doing profitable work that other people will pay them for. we have, in a world of true abundance, you shouldn't have to work to justify your life. You should be free to enjoy the wealth of the world. And if we're going to get to that place, we have to change our ethics around that.
I felt like that answer can explain the type of things I'll be talking about, and it's a good springboard. I would even go a step further than what Sam is saying. We should be thinking that way about our self-worth now. It's the next logical step to take in that situation where nobody has to work and all energy is renewable in a utopia. But what about now? Why attach your self-worth to your job? You can do it if you want to, if you have nothing else to do, or if it's by far the thing you love to do most in the world, go right ahead. But you should be attaching yourself to your job because you love it, not because it's the only reason you have enough money to keep yourself alive. The only reason jobs exist in the first place is to make everyone's life better and easier and possible. We all work to satisfy other people. When you get down to it, that is the reason why every business exists, to serve other people, so they don't have to do it themselves. Anyone hear the story about the guy who made his own chicken sandwich from scratch, where he captured the chicken, killed it, cooked it, grew his own ingredients, made his own bread, grew his tomatoes? It cost him thousands of dollars, if I remember correctly, and took months. But we can buy one from a store for $6 instead, and everyone who has a job to make that possible has a job so that none of us have to make it from scratch ourselves. Jobs do not exist to give people a way to make money. They do give people money, but that's not why they exist. Their primary function is to make our lives easier. You shouldn't create jobs that don't need to be created just to find a way to give people money or give people meaning in their lives. We should be thinking about this in today's world, not just the world Sam was talking about in the utopia. What if we get halfway there between where we are now and the utopia? What if we only needed 5 million Americans to have jobs, to be able to support 300 million Americans? If only 5 million people had jobs, should only 5 million people be able to make money and everyone else somehow either dies or has to live off nothing? Should we hire people for absolutely no reason at all? Like, hey, I know you don't like it, but in order to be paid in our society, you have to be miserable for 8 hours a day like everybody else. Otherwise, why am I working 8 hours a day if you're going to make just as much money as me? And I'll stress it again, probably the final time I'll mention it here, is that the primary function of a job is to make our lives easier, so we don't have to go out to the fishing pier and fish for our own food, or take a gun and hunt for our own food every night. Jobs do not exist to give your life meaning. If you love your job and you feel it gives you meaning, then that's great. Good for you. And I assume if you didn't need to have a job to be able to make money, you would do that thing anyway. Or you would do the thing that you wanted to do most. Anyone who makes less money than me, well, they deserve to make that much. And if they didn't, they would pull themselves up by their bootstraps and go find a better job, or get the skills to find a better job. This line of thinking would be totally fine if the world was fair. There are some people who work harder than many billionaires have in the world, and they have never had more than $5,000 in their bank account. Or they don't even know what a bank account is. What about the difference between physical labor and mental labor? How do you quantify those two? If I'm lifting 50-pound boxes up and down ladders all day for 8 hours a day, what's the math conversion there on how much money I should make compared to someone who sits at an office desk and talks to rich people all day, trying to convince them to buy the product of the business they work for? Should those two people make the same amount of money? Does it depend on the product? Does it depend on how heavy the box is? Now you might say, oh, just supply and demand. You don't need to find the difference between physical labor and mental labor. If 2 million people can do the 50-pound lifting work, but only 100,000 are good enough to do the office work, then the office work should get paid more money. Okay, that's fine, you have a fair point. But then, what if someone wanted to be a doctor, but they didn't have money to pay for medical school? What if their parents didn't want them to go to college because they didn't want to pay for it? What if they lived in a country where the thought of college was just a dream? What if they lived in a country where college was free instead of costing $50,000 a year? The world is unfair and imperfect. Is investing your money in the stock market hard work? Is there a supply and demand aspect to that? I did it. I have money in the stock market. Took me some Googling and some initial capital. And now I make money in exchange for doing absolutely nothing for society. I don't lift a finger. It just seems wrong, especially for people who attach their self-worth to their jobs. Wouldn't you hate it if someone who had $1 million from their parents made more money off the market or off interest every year than you did working 40 hours a week? Is that fair? Let's talk about the people who use the line of thinking of just pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. Take advantage of capitalism and the free market and just work harder and smarter than everyone else, and you will make more money than them. And if you don't make more money than them, then obviously the only explanation is that you just aren't as hard of a worker, or you aren't as smart, or a combination of both. The people who think that way tend to make more money than the people who don't think that way. We need haves and have-nots in our society. If everyone worked just as hard or just as smart as some guy who makes $1 million a year, we can't all make $1 million a year. We can't all be the billionaire. No matter how hard you work or how smart you are, you can be Albert Einstein. But if everyone else on Earth was also as intelligent as Albert Einstein, you would not be guaranteed to make $1 million a year. We need have-nots in order to have haves. If poor people didn't exist, then the rich people would not seem so rich. There are some people who are rich that think they earn the right to be rich more than anyone else, and it truly is because of their effort that they are where they are. And that is true for some people, but not a majority of rich people. Alright, gonna take a sharp turn to a similar subject and talk about the free market that Republicans dream of having and how great it would be if it was truly a free market. And then also about the GOP tax plan that is still yet to be set in stone, but is almost there. It's almost on the horizon as of this recording. No regulations from the government, free market, let's go. It will balance itself out with competition and the will of the people. If Verizon is charging too much, okay, everyone is just gonna stop their business with Verizon and move over to the competitors. Boom, problem solved because of the free market. Wait a minute. Apparently, the only company that I can sign up for internet, TV, and phone is Verizon, because Comcast and Time Warner and other companies don't have services set up in my area. Now what do I do? What's the free market gonna do for me now? There's no competition now. Am I expected to pack up my bags and move to a place that has multiple internet providers? And would that solve my problems anyway? And if there's only 3 providers in my new home in Florida, does that really solve my problem that much more than having just one company to choose from? While we're at it, let's make sex trafficking legal and let the market work itself out, right? Surely people who start a business in sex trafficking would never get any business because people think that's a terrible thing. So that business would never have enough capital to run, and there would be no sex trafficking, right? Not that it actually exists today illegally, and there's enough money to go around for it to survive. Why doesn't Lockheed and Martin sell private military jets to anyone who can afford them? Hey, if you're a billionaire, you can have your own fighter jets and your own drones and the ability to destroy a lot of land and a lot of people in a small amount of time. But it's illegal to do those things, so you can't. But if you have the money to buy one, then you should be able to buy one. Right to bear arms. Nuclear arms too, right? What about private prisons? Those exist right now, with profit being directly correlated to the number of inmates held in their prison. That's fair. I mean, it's a free market, except it's based on people being convicted of a crime. Kind of a conflict of interest there. What about net neutrality? Why should we have regulations to keep the internet open and have ISPs not be able to throttle and limit certain websites when we can just have a free market? Hey, if Comcast wants to stop everyone from watching Netflix and go watch their own video streaming service instead, they can do that and then watch everyone hop over and switch to Verizon. Oh, wait, they only have one choice because they live in a certain area. Oh, but you can just move to another area just so you don't have to pay Comcast and you get to choose Verizon instead. That's totally plausible for everybody. If you agree that net neutrality should stay, then you agree that there are some regulations that need to be in place to keep businesses in check. Because face it, there is never going to be a situation where we have enough options for every single thing in our life that monopolies and oligopolies will never exist. It's just not going to happen. There's never going to be 300 companies that have fiber optic networks. What if there were 500 different private prison businesses? Would that solve the problem that they bring? The core objective of the CEO of a private prison is the complete antithesis of what humans want in life. No matter how many or how little private prison institutions there are, no matter how little or how much they pay the government to get people incarcerated in their prison, the way they make money is by giving inmates, real people, as little as possible to survive on so they can make the most money. What about supermarkets that sell food? Can't make up any excuses there that it's a choice to eat food. Food should be free for all people. Food that is more expensive to make can cost a premium. This way, people don't eat filet mignon for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but the most basic, cheap food available should be free. It should be paid for by our taxes. It should be universal. What does the owner of a grocery store have to do to get business? Make sure people would rather pay him money than starve to death? I think he's got that going for him. Looks like it's a smashing success. I'd say access to internet is about just as valuable as access to food, so having access to the internet should not cost money. Where do you draw the line between access to food and access to the internet? Where does healthcare fall along that line? You could say it's outside the line. I wouldn't. I'd put it very close to food, because unless you get hit by a train when you're 23 years old, you're probably going to need to see a doctor at some point in your life. And that's assuming you skip checkups too. Oh, but it's a choice to buy healthcare. Or it should be a choice. And even if you had a leg to stand on saying that it should be a choice, it simply costs too much money for one average person to deal with. We should all pay a tax that pays for everybody's healthcare, so none of us have to worry about getting sick or having to go to the hospital. Does humanity not make you realize this? Like, hey, some people are just going to get unlucky and they're going to get a virus or they're going to get a disease like cancer, and some people are going to be lucky and get none of that. Should we just decide who becomes and who stays rich or not based on who gets lucky enough to not get cancer? Does that have anything to do with working hard and pulling up your bootstraps? The world is not fair. We should all be willing to help each other out. Instead, people are profiting. People are making it their job to profit off of other people's disease. What makes you deserving of that money? If it is a basic necessity of life, it is not fair to leave it up to the free market. Because people don't have a choice whether to buy their product or not. If they don't buy it, they will die. And this is ignoring all aspects of whether things are regulated or not. This doesn't even need to go as deep as that. What about car insurance? It is illegal to not have car insurance in every state except for, I think, New Hampshire and Virginia. And in those states, you have to prove that you have enough money to pay for any possible accident or for any possible car repairs or hospital bills. It makes sense that car insurance is mandatory because you don't want people driving around with no money, and if they get into an accident, who's going to pay for it? Maybe the government could pay for it. But you see, we're talking about cars now instead of a person's own body with health insurance. So here's where things get tricky. Maybe that person won't care so much about hitting someone else's car in a parking lot if they know the government's just going to pay for their car repairs. But they can't really choose whether they get cancer or not, and they can't give someone else cancer. So yes, having the government pay for car insurance seems like an awful idea, but it's also mandatory. So what do private car insurance companies have to do to get business? At that point, it just becomes keep prices similar to the other companies that are in competition with me, and then I get money. I don't even have to care who my constituents are or make sure my product is actually good. Literally, all I have to do is exist, and people have to buy my product. So we have a tough decision here. If leaving it up to the government to pay for car accidents is a terrible idea, and the idea of having something privatized that's mandatory seems like a terrible idea, at least to me, then what do you do? Make it government run, have the people that run the company that give you insurance, have them paid by the government via people's taxes, and just have it not be a for-profit company. That's it. Because then they won't feel inclined to deny paying for your accident. They wouldn't try to weasel out of paying for the thing you pay them to do. Because they'd make the same amount of money no matter how many accidents there are. There's no incentive for them to screw people over. Okay, now on to the GOP tax bill. Mostly I'm just going to talk about tax cuts in general and the whole trickle-down reasoning. I read a report on Bloomberg that interviewed CEOs of different companies, and they said the money they save from the tax cuts will go to shareholders, not to their workers' wages. You know how Trump has been saying nonstop how great the economy is doing and how high the stock market is, best ever? Well, if it's doing that well right now with the tax rates we have now, why aren't wages going up now. Corporate profit margins are bigger than ever. Where's the wage increase? Oh, whoop-de-doo, every year the minimum wage in New York goes up $2. What about not the minimum wage? What about if your company is doing well, you raise workers' wages? I'm not saying you should. I can't give you a good reason why. Well, I can, but I won't go into it now. But the excuse that I am bringing is literally staring at us in the face with the tax cuts. And this is all the conservatives have been spouting, is that it's going to be great for the middle class because if corporations make a lot of money, it'll trickle down and the people they employ will get their wages increased. They're the ones saying it, not me. But if corporate profit margins are so high right now, where's the wage increases? If they're not increasing now, why would I think that they would increase if the margins got even higher? If wages don't increase, how does trickle-down work? You do know that not every American is a shareholder, right? And of the ones that are, some might not have shares in companies that are doing well. And of the ones that do have shares in companies that will do well thanks to the tax cuts, who will get a boost of money, how many of them have less than $50,000 in shares and will make not that much money over the course of a year holding that investment? 43% of Americans are invested in the stock market. That includes people with 401ks and other retirement plans. So how many people are there with accounts that aren't retirement plans? Even less than 43%. And how much you want to bet that of the people with money invested into stocks that aren't part of a retirement plan, how much you want to bet that those people are likely already in the top 1 to 20% of Americans in terms of income? So tell me again how an increase in the stock market is good for the middle class, is good for a majority of Americans, because our lives would be ruined if the corporate overlords happen to hit a depression. Our livelihood is dependent on them doing well, so we should thank our lucky stars that they have great profit margins. And if your solution is, well, just invest all your money in the stock market and you'll make tons of money once this GOP tax plan passes, well, that will create an even bigger too big to fail situation. You're attaching your livelihood and your sustenance onto a corporation and their success. So everyone who's invested in the stock market has to pray that these corporations don't fail, or else they'll lose all their money too, not just the corporation. That's really bad. There'd be bailouts for every company. There's no risk, there's no chance of them falling because too many people would lose money. The stocks are at record highs. Middle class families are still struggling. Why would the stock market going up any more than it already is change anything? Why would wages go up any more than they are now when profit margins are already this high? So we have the proof of trickle down right now because corporations are already at the top. If the trickle down isn't happening now, if it hasn't happened in the past 8 years that there's been a bull market and the stocks have been going up and the margins have been going up, then why would it happen in the next 8 years if it keeps going up? You have to be able to explain that to convince me. And one more thing about the tax plan, the deficit. So I'm supposed to believe cutting taxes and increasing economic growth will decrease the deficit. Okay, let's walk through this. If you cut taxes, okay, that's an increase in the deficit. That's where we start. But the way we get that money back to pay for the lack of taxes toward the national debt is by giving corporations more money and rich people so that investors get more money from their stocks, and with wage increases, workers make more money. Therefore, if everyone is getting richer, they're paying more money in taxes. So, hey, I made $80,000 last year. I paid $30,000 in taxes. But next year I'm going to make $150,000 because the economy is boosted and my wage increased almost double. So my tax bracket will change and I will pay a higher flat amount of money because I made more money, even with the tax cuts. So I will pay more than $30,000 that I did last year because I made almost double. I will pay $50,000. I get to keep more of my hard-earned money than I would have under another tax plan. Even though my job didn't change and I didn't work any harder than I did last year, I'm now making more money. That doesn't really jive with the pull yourselves up by your bootstraps thinking. But I also pay the government more money at a flat basic level, so I'm decreasing the deficit. Is that the explanation that conservatives go with? If I get that wrong, feel free to correct me. I'm just not sure where all that extra money comes from. How can everybody make more money? Where's that extra money coming from? Does the mint create it? How will almost every working American, whether they're a shareholder or not, whether they're a CEO of a corporation or not, whether they make minimum wage, how will all of those people make more money? Not just more money, but enough money to jump into a higher tax bracket and pay more taxes than they otherwise would have, even under a plan that had a higher tax rate. The money doesn't just go to the people's pockets and stay out of the government's pockets. If it did, the deficit would do nothing but increase. But people like Ted Cruz say, oh, no, it'll decrease because if everyone's making more money, they will pay more flat tax money compared to what they used to, just based on their higher income alone, even with the tax cuts. And that is legitimately only possible if we just create money. Are we going to get more money from China and Britain and our other trading allies? What would make us get more money from other countries? Why would tax cuts increase our exports and or decrease our imports? That's the only possible way to literally get more money into the country, where people get both higher wages and the government gets more money from its people. So if anyone wants to explain that, let me know. I'm not sure how to enter that into Google. Just to wrap things up here, I want to end with something nice. Something I think it's easy for people to forget in these past 10 months. Have you ever thought about something or said something to somebody where a few hours, if not a few minutes later, you say to yourself, what am I doing? Why did I say that? That was really stupid. I wish I hadn't have said that. Or if you didn't tell anyone and you were just thinking it, you go, what was I thinking? Yeah, everybody does that. And we all know everybody does that. But at the same time, some of us can lose respect for someone based on one single thing they've said that you disagree with. If you disagree on that one thing, suddenly you can't trust a single other thing they say. You can't trust that they're stating facts. You have to check for yourself. For some reason, you start discrediting any of their opinions as wrong. And if you both agree on something else, it happens to be a complete coincidence. A lot of us do that. Think of someone who voted for Trump, but in 1,000 years you would never be able to see yourself voting for him. If you bring these two things you know together, the idea that you can say and do stupid things from moment to moment and regret them, and that you also find it hard to be able to like people after you find out they voted for Trump, then you have to try very hard to stop thinking that way. Because you know people can be fooled. You know people can change their minds. You know people can do stupid things in the moment. They can think stupid things in the moment. They can say stupid things in the moment. They can change their minds. So try to take everything people say at face value and agree or disagree with it on its own merits, whether they voted for Trump or not, whether they like the Jets or the Giants, whether they think sushi is God's greatest gift to mankind or they despise it. Don't immediately jump on somebody just because they have a history of doing things you disagree with. Every day is a new one, and every opinion you've yet to hear, no matter who it's from, deserves a chance to be thought through instead of struck down immediately. You can strike it down, but just think about it first, even if it's coming from someone like Donald Trump.